The sound Om is given a very important position in all of the spiritual literature that we find in the Indian subcontinent. A little deeper understanding of it can allow us to appreciate what this sound is all about and what it really does to us. So, if we look at the sound from a very physiological perspective, the sound Om is comprised of the sound A, U and These are the three sounds that make up the sound Om. So the sound A is the very first sound that the human vocal instrument can produce. And that's when in the Gita, Shri Krishna says, of all the sounds, I'm sound A. Because the first sound. And then you have the sound U, which is the very last vowel that the human vocal instrument can produce. So you have A and U. If one tries to go from A to U, so you have So we see that the sound O comes right at the center. It's the center point between the A and the U. And the vibrational impact of the is that it is a sound that establishes things. So the A, if you go to the root experience of the sound A, is that it is the sound of abundance of existence. It is the existence itself. The sound U is a sound that contains everything within itself, or it's also sometimes represented as a sound that gives. So you have the A, the U, and then the that consolidates it all. So if you try and represent this on the human vocal system, and you look at the human vocal system as a range of potential sound producers, so the human vocal instrument is the only part of the human vocal system, of the human body, that can reproduce all the sounds of creation. And in that, you have A at one end and you have U at the other end. So when we go from A to U and you sound the O in the middle, it's as if you are plucking that range right at the center. Now, the beauty of this is that the sound O, from a vibrational perspective, is the most neutral vibration that you can have for this range from A to U. All right. If one looks again at the human system as a vibratory structure, normally this vibratory structure is full of a lot of noise. So if you have to represent it on the string, it would be like a string that's going haywire all the time with all the different noises that are created through our physical conditions, our emotional being, our mental being. So all of this generates its own noise in the structure. And if that had to be represented on, let's say, a string of sound production, it would produce this very erratic kind of a vibrational structure. Now, to this noisy structure, when one introduces the sound Om, or the sound O rather, it starts acting as a conscious, neutral vibration. So the example that I often give is like when you are in a battlefield. If you are in a battlefield and there is a real din all around, if somebody starts playing the flute, then it's very natural for the consciousness to tune into that flute. So the sound Om has a little bit of that role, that in this noisy structure of diverse inputs and outputs, when one sounds the Om, then it allows this neutral vibration to resonate in the being. And like in the case of the flute, when one starts listening to it, then the attention that one gives to that sound acts as a means to restructure our sound formations and resonate with that. So the more we do the Om, the more it will reveal that almost like a factory reset mode for our being. And what happens as a consequence of that is the more quiet we become in our sound structure, our internal sound structure, the more we become receptive to the impact of the universe on our being. So if the universe is like the symphony, this grand symphony of harmony, of harmonious symphony that is playing, which we shut out because of our own noisy structures. When we keep repeating the Om, we silence our being because of the neutrality of that vibration and allow ourselves to be impacted by the knowledge and the wisdom of creation around us. And therefore, when one allows that to happen, then one has access to all of that. So that could be one reason why also the sound Om is said to be the single word representative of all knowledge, because it silences our being to that point of resonance with the universe. And when we are resonating with the nature of Srishti itself or the universe itself, then we are in tune with the knowledge structures of the cosmos. So that is what makes the sound so powerful. And sometimes I get asked this question that, how should one utter it? So is it like should one do the whole thing like an Now that's also possible, but in that case, it's like, again, if you understand the rationale behind it, it helps us to then choose one's own path. So if you have the range and you do Aum, you're literally like plucking all the way. So it will have a kind of a cumulative resounding effect in the being. Okay, but if you do the Om, then it's the single pluck that you're doing consistently, and the grounds it. Similarly, if people do a sound which is more the you see that in that range it hinges more towards the sound, and then you have others who do the Om, which is ooh. It's more towards the oo. So if you get this idea of the string and what one is doing, then it's a game to really try and discover that point of the O, which is really that center point. And I think the way that one would identify it, because it would vary from individual to individual. Our systems are unique in that context, and therefore we can identify the correctness of the O within ourselves when one achieves that amplification of that sound. So it's a bit like on the violin, that sometimes when the note is almost right, it will sound good, it will sound beautiful, but when you get the right note, or if somebody is trying to sing and you hit the right note, that sense of awe that happens is, in many cases, an indicator of getting it right. That rhythm in manifestation is when you get that spontaneous awe, that awe that happens. So discovering the Om is really a game that one can engage with. And the more one plays with it, because that playing with it also adds to the joyfulness of being. I think it's also important to remember that the spirit underlying the sound production is very vital in allowing the sound to have its full, free expression in our being. So I think the more we are surrendered, soft, joyful, and then you play with the sound Om, with the spirit of listening. There is a lot of listening that is required when one does the Om, because the Om is all around. You see, it's the sum total of all the sounds of creation. So it's around us. And when we do it, then it's like we are trying to match our expression of it with that mother sound that exists. And when we get it right, then bah, it creates that whole absolute explosion of divinity, perhaps. And I think in terms of sound realization, I personally believe that it is an equivalent of saying Aham Brahmasmi is an experience in space of the potential of that ultimate energy that we are made of. And in terms of sounds, it would be Aham Omkarosmi. I am that Om. And that is what makes the sound so very beautiful. And So Sri Aurobindo has this fabulous quote on the Om. He says that the basic syllable Om, which is the foundation of all the perfect creative sounds of the revealed word, Om is the one universal formulation of the energy of sound and speech. So it is a vibration so it's the para which gets expressed in the Vaikhari. So the 4 levels of para, Pashyanti, the contact, the Madhyama, the translation and the expression. So he says that Om is the one universal formulation of the energy of sound and speech, that which contains and sums up, synthesizes and releases all the spiritual power and all the potentiality of Vak. So in the uttered, in the ahata sound, when we are actually expressing that sound, it is the most complete. He says Vak is speech, the God is speech, and Shabda, sound, vibration and the word. So with this, I think it's a good idea to do an Om to close. So, Om.